Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Westside congregation. We are glad you could join us for our online service. I'm Donna Johnston. Our speaker today is Reverend Carole Eagleheart. Our topic is one that is very dear to my heart, the Labyrinth. As Unitarian Universalists, we affirm 7 principles. Our program today is based on principle number 4, a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. As UUs, we live out our principles within a living tradition of wisdom and spirituality drawn from several sources. Today's program is drawn from the first source, direct experience of that transcending mystery and wonder affirmed in all cultures, which moves us to a renewal of the spirit and an openness to the forces which create and uphold life. Each week, we set aside time for announcements that are important to our congregation. Next Sunday, August 23rd, our board will be meeting. If you have questions or proposals or concerns of any sort, please make sure you email them to Steve Poyani or Reverend Nancy before then. Rio the dog continues to appreciate the newspaper donated for her use. Your contributions can be left in the bin under the pergola outside the social hall door. Our adult RE class is reading and discussing The Unitarian Way by Philip Hewitt. If you are interested in joining in, please contact either David Kuhn or Reverend Nancy. The class meets via Zoom on Sundays at 9:45 a.m. We offer special thanks today to Linda Martin's friend Bill Newrogue. Bill is the one who shot the amazing drone footage that gave us a bird's eye view of our congregation's building and our labyrinths. Our thanks also to our labyrinth walkers, Linda Laurel Anderson and Lisa Keir, who took time to join me in the video that you will be seeing shortly during the moment for centering. One of the traditions in our Sunday service is to light a flaming chalice. If you have a personal chalice or candle at home, draw it close to you now, and we will light them together speaking these words. May the light of this chalice illumine our path as we search for truth and meaning. Please join me in affirming our aspirations. Life is a gift. We gather in community to celebrate the glories and the mysteries of this great gift. In the light of truth and in the warmth of love, we gather to seek, to sustain, and to share. Love is the doctrine of this congregation. The quest for truth is our sacrament, and service is our prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, and to serve others in community to the end that all souls grow into harmony with creation. Thus do we covenant with one another. Each week in our services, we take a moment to remember the animals that share this earth with us. Here is Bram Cast Hecht with our animal ministry moment.
What is it that so many people find enchanting in animals? Their essence. Their being is not covered up by their mind, as it is in most humans. And whenever you feel that essence in another, you feel it in yourself. This poem is called Brains Aren't Everything. Realizing that you can sit on a flat screen TV for warmth, you just have to knock it down first. Most cats are born knowing how to hunt mice, but I've never caught one. So what? You can't tell everything about a cat by his standard pest scores. My mommy used to meow at me that I wasn't the sharpest claw on the paw just because I tried to bite her ear. and I once fell in the water dish. But one thing I know is that I am full of grit, and not just because I was rolling around in the loose flower bed soil. I'm not afraid to seek warmth and comfort in places smarter cats wouldn't dare stick their wet noses. Is it dangerous sleeping in a dryer? But do you know what's more dangerous? Looking back on your life and regretting those moments which you could have been even cozier.
Each week, we pause and celebrate our gifts of love and commitment. Thank you for everything you do to help support this congregation. Your gifts are important as we work to sustain our presence here during the pandemic. We are truly grateful. We miss seeing each other during this time when we can't be together. So each week we include in our service a glimpse into the life of one of our friends and family. Today's moment features Susan Fox.
Right across the road from UU Westside congregation is the home of Susan Fox. She lives there with her 3 rescue dogs, Felix, Kia, and Timmy. 2 other creatures close to her heart are her horses, Dapple and Rendezvous.
Oh, I've been into horses since I was 5 or 6. I never had birthday parties. The whole family used to go riding. Those were my birthday parties.
Rendezvous doesn't look like it, but he's in Appaloosa.
I became enamored of Appaloosas. As I went on further and had more of them, I realized the reason I like them is because they are not push button. You talk to some people about Appaloosas and they just groan and roll their eyes because they can be difficult. But I think that's why they're a challenge to me.
I asked her how it feels when she's riding.
Well, you have to stay in the moment. And normally I'm not very good at that. I'm planning or I'm, thinking about what needs to get done next or what work I have to do. But when you're riding the horses, you pretty much have to stay in the moment because at any minute, especially this spotted one here, he will take umbrage at something that goes by, a trash truck or something, and he will whirl on me. And you have to be ready.
Susan didn't grow up in a rich family.
I think to know me, number one, you have to know that I'm an Army brat.
The family lived in New Mexico, Hawaii, New York, and Washington.
I very much believe in work, and my parents, especially my father, instilled the work ethic in me.
Susan had a career in nursing. She got her master's degree specializing in ICU and cardiac. And finally, she commuted from Anchorage, Alaska to Austin, Texas to get her PhD in nursing. With all her experience helping patients on ventilators, I asked what she thought of the current COVID crisis.
It is tough. So still the bottom line is don't get it. Wear your mask. Don't go into crowded places. Keep your distance and be safe.
Susan's husband died 2.5 years ago, and she went through a difficult time.
So I was trying to think, how do I recover my spirituality or get more spirituality or whatever? So I said, well, I'll just start going to the church because I used to go over there to hear when you have the community affairs and you have the talks by different people. I used to go over there for those, and I loved those. So anyhow, I started going to church, and so here I am.
We're glad she crossed the road to be with us.
And now, Carole has a story for us.
This is a very ancient story, and over the centuries it has inspired a lot of art, drawings and paintings and statues. So I'll show you some pictures of those as we go along. Once upon a time, long, long ago on the island of Crete, there was a very powerful king named Minos. King Minos was not only very powerful, he was very sad and very angry. His son had gone to the city of Athens to take part in games that were sort of like the Olympics. The son was very skillful, and he had done well in the games, but he was killed. Some say by accident, and some say he was murdered. King Minos was so angry about his son's death that he demanded a tribute from Athens. He decreed that every 7 years they were to send him 7 of the bravest young men and 7 of their most beautiful maidens. The young people were to be loaded onto a ship with black sails and were never to be seen again. Now, it wasn't just that the young people were being sent into slavery. Theirs was an even more terrible fate. You see, King Minos had gotten a very famous engineer named Daedalus to construct a labyrinth on Crete. Not an open labyrinth like we think of, with paths laid out in stone. No, this was an underground labyrinth, very dark and spooky. But the worst part was that hiding in the center of the labyrinth was a monster called the Minotaur. The Minotaur was half man and half bull, and he was a terrifying creature. The fate of the young people from Athens was to be sent into this dark and scary place to be eaten alive by the Minotaur. Now, the king of Athens, Aegeus, had a brave young son named Theseus. He told his father that he wanted to be part of the group of young people sent to Crete because he thought that he could kill the Minotaur. Aegeus didn't want to send his son Theseus because he thought he would be killed by the monster and that he'd never see his son again. But Theseus insisted. Finally, Aegeus agreed, but he said, "When you return, take down the black sails and put up white sails so that I will know that you have survived." So off sailed Theseus to Crete with a group of young Athenians. King Minos, glad at getting revenge, paraded the young people through the streets before they were to go and die in the labyrinth. Now, King Minos had a daughter named Ariadne. And when Ariadne saw Theseus and the group of young people from Athens, she fell in love with Theseus. She spoke to Theseus in secret and said, "I have a gift for you. If you make it out of the labyrinth alive, take me with you to Athens and let me be your queen." What was the gift? It was a ball of string. Theseus could attach one end of the string to the doorpost of the labyrinth and then spin it out as he went into the tunnels. That way, once he killed the Minotaur, he could follow the thread and find his way out of the labyrinth again. So Theseus went into the labyrinth, and sure enough, there was the Minotaur waiting for him. And the Minotaur was a horrible beast. There was a tremendous fight. They struggled and they fought and they fought. And finally, Theseus stabbed the Minotaur with his sword and killed it. Then he found his way back out of the labyrinth, following Ariadne's thread. Theseus and the other Athenian young people celebrated. They were able to escape the island, and he took Ariadne with him as he had promised. They stopped at the island of Naxos on their way home, and they all took a nap on the beach. But the goddess Athena spoke to Theseus and told him to leave Ariadne on the island of Naxos. Why? Because Dionysus, the god of wine, wanted Ariadne for his own. So Theseus and the others sneaked away, setting sail without her, even though she woke up and called after him, begging him to take her. We don't know if Ariadne was happy with the god Dionysus. Some say she was, and some say she wasn't. But the story doesn't end completely happily for Theseus. Remember how his father asked him to take down the black sails and put up white sails to show that he had survived? Theseus forgot. King Aegeus saw the ship coming, saw the black sails, and thought his son had been killed. So he threw himself into the sea, and he died. And that's why we call it the Aegean Sea. That's the end of the story of Theseus and the Minotaur.
It is time now for our moment for centering, a walk in our labyrinths.
Keep walking in the light. Keep following the path. Draw closer. Draw closer. Keep dreaming in the dark. Remember who you are. Draw closer to life. Keep walking in the path. Keep following the dream. Draw closer. Draw closer. Keep dreaming in the dark. Remember who you are, who you are. Draw closer to life, to life.
Every week, we take time to recognize important moments in our lives, our joys and our concerns. Today, we light a candle of joy for the 145 pounds of supplies donated to Storehouse West last week. Storehouse West staff expressed their thanks on behalf of the many people struggling during the pandemic to make ends meet. We light a candle of concern for all those affected by the virus, those who are ill, those who are struggling financially, those who are feeling lonely, separated from family and friends. We light a candle of joy for this week's historic naming of a woman of color as a vice presidential candidate. We light a candle of concern for Donna's daughter. She was expecting a child, but lost the baby at 9 weeks. We light one final white candle for the joys and concerns that remain in our hearts. For the victims of racial violence, for their struggle and for their lives, we light our special red candle. What is a labyrinth? And why have labyrinths been a source of fascination for people for thousands of years? The first thing you need to know is the difference between a labyrinth and a maze. This is a labyrinth. It has a meandering path, and there's one way in. It leads to the center, and when you get to the center, you turn around and you go out following the same path. It can be circular in shape, or it can be square, or it can even be octagonal, but always one way in and one way out. Now this is a maze. A maze is like a puzzle. It has twists and turns and blind alleys. Have you ever walked in a corn maze? If so, you know that you can get lost in a maze. It's part of the fun. It's a puzzle that you have to figure out. It's a left brain activity. Your mind is active, calculating how to get to the center and how to get back out again because there are a lot of choices. But with a labyrinth, there's only one choice, and that's whether to go in or not. If you choose to go in, you won't be needing that active left brain. Instead, you have the opportunity to quiet your mind, to go deep. You heard the story about Theseus and the Minotaur on the island of Crete, and there are ancient coins from Crete that show a labyrinth. And often it's said that these coins commemorate that story of the Minotaur. But look closely at this coin. It depicts a labyrinth. There's only one way in and one way out. If the story of the Minotaur was about a labyrinth, Theseus would not have needed that ball of string from Ariadne to find his way out. Once he killed the Minotaur, all he had to do was turn around and walk out. So the story was really about a maze, not a labyrinth. So why do we have a labyrinth on this Cretan coin? It harks back to something way more ancient than the story of Theseus and the Minotaur. That story comes from patriarchal times. But way back in the Bronze Age, Crete had a very different culture. It was a culture that honored the goddess. There are no weapons in their art, not even hunting scenes. Instead, there are paintings of birds and flowers, and pictures of dolphins swimming. Instead of having scary stories about a monster bull eating people, they painted pictures of young people dancing with bulls and doing acrobatics. It was a culture of life, not a culture of death. So one way to look at the ancient symbol of the Cretan labyrinth is as a birth canal, a symbol of the Earth Mother giving birth to life. What's interesting is that we see this symbol in many parts of the world. There are images of labyrinths in India, Egypt, France, Italy, Scandinavia, the British Isles, and even in Peru. Here's one of the oldest carvings of a labyrinth in Sardinia. It dates from around 2500 to 2000 before the Common Era. That's more than 4,000 years ago. And here's the earliest representation of the labyrinth that they found on a ceramic vessel. It's from Tel Rifa'at, Syria, and it dates from around 1300 BCE. Here's a clay tablet that was found at Pylos in Peloponnesos, Greece. It's from around 1200 BCE. And do you know about the Nazca lines that were carved into the earth in Peru? The images that were so huge that you can really only get a sense of them from a plane? Well, there's a labyrinth image there too. Right here in the Southwest, you can find images of labyrinths in petroglyphs. Are you familiar with the baskets made by the Tohono O'odham people of Arizona? This particular pattern is called the Man in the Maze. Now, if you look closely, you'll see that it's not a maze, it's a labyrinth. And it's not a man, it's their god, Aidoi. And the path is the path to his special magical place on a mountain. This was actually the pattern used in creating our first labyrinth here at UU Westside. I wanted to know how it happened that this labyrinth was built, so I got in touch with Nan Porterfield, who lives in Hawaii now. We talked on a Zoom call.
I heard about a labyrinth resource group in Santa Fe, and I went up to see some of their work, and I went to some of their workshops to see what it would be like to explore a labyrinth and to actually walk some of them. I had read about them and seen videos about how to make them on the internet. And there are all these little vignettes showing you how to do the right circle, the left circle, and how to put them all together to end up with one continuous path. That was the beginning. I started talking to people at church about putting a labyrinth there, and we formed the Labyrinth Committee. And one of the fun things was that Chris and Ed Tucker were involved in this group, and they have an RV. And so on the day that we were going to do the labyrinth, actually making the labyrinth, they brought their RV the night before, slept overnight, and made breakfast for us, pancake breakfast for us, so that we could be off to a good start on the labyrinth making. Ed actually did a lot of it. He used the divining rod to find the entrance. And once we had the entrance, then we started figuring out how much space we had between certain bushes that were already there. And that's how we decided the size of the labyrinth. And then we built it from there. There were probably 10 or so of us who worked on it together. There was a lot of labor figuring out where the path would go and then hauling all the rocks from someone else's house over to the property and then out to the labyrinth to put it together. And as we got more rocks, we just added in, filling in the lines.
Many people have walked this labyrinth. Sometimes we've walked the labyrinth as a congregation. We've walked it on special occasions. Some of you may remember Don Becker's wedding. The labyrinth is registered on the Worldwide Labyrinth Locator. And that's how Donna Johnston found us. I met with her in her garden and asked her how she happened to get into labyrinths.
I used to be an airline worker, and I used to fly off to places just to spend the day. And my favorite place became San Francisco. And I just happened to be wandering around San Francisco looking for new neighborhoods to explore. And I found myself at Grace Cathedral. So I wandered in and there was this labyrinth. I thought, well, what is this about? This is really different. So I explored it. There was literature set up and I took some with me. So I walked that labyrinth and then I walked the labyrinth that they had created outside too. And there were a lot of tourists around. So I wasn't really sure what I was supposed to experience, but it stayed with me. I read the literature, and the next time I was able to go back to San Francisco, I went straight there. It stayed with me, and it called me. I dreamed about it. So I went many times. I read the books. I read Lauren Artress's book. I started looking up all the different websites and became just so fascinated. After that, I started looking around Albuquerque, and one of our local free newspapers had a little tiny ad inviting people to go out to the Methodist Church off of Central and like around 3rd and 4th Street and spend a few hours in a quiet labyrinth meditation. And that was how I met my friend Julianne, and I actually became part of that ministry. So every first Wednesday of the month, we would get this big canvas labyrinth that we borrowed from the Presbyterian church up at New Life Presbyterian, actually. And Julianne and I would set up the labyrinth, and we would put candles around it, and this was towards the evening. So as the sun set, the candles would glow, and it was just a beautiful, peaceful experience. We played CDs with native flute music mainly, and people just loved it. Eventually, and this happened after 9/11, we decided to build a labyrinth over at the Presbyterian church. And that one is there to this day. It was very professionally done. I became motivated to build a labyrinth in my backyard. My husband helped me. And we collected rocks from all over the place. And we had the basic pattern out. I started to plant herbs.
This is how Donna's labyrinth looked in the beginning. And this is how it looks today.
I got it registered on the Worldwide Labyrinth Locator. And through that, I found there was a church 2 miles up the road that had a labyrinth. And I just had to go find it, so I did. And it was full of weeds, and the rocks were kicked around. And so I felt at that point, maybe I'm trespassing, maybe I shouldn't do anything, even though I really wanted to. I waited until a Sunday morning and discovered there were people there at the church, and I went over and asked permission to go out there and restore the labyrinth, and they not only said yes please, but they welcomed me into the church, and I've been there ever since. And a few years down the line, I got permission from the board to build a second labyrinth, so my husband and I created the bigger labyrinth, which is at the south parking lot. And I've continued to be involved to this day.
The labyrinths need a lot of work to maintain. The rocks get moved by the animals and the weeds grow. Donna works hard at the maintenance. Sometimes people like Laurel Anderson come and help.
It's a hard work to keep the labyrinth up, but it's worth it.
You've already seen that labyrinths come in different shapes. They also come in different sizes. Labyrinths are identified by the number of circuits they have, the number of paths they have counting outward from the center. This is a 7-circuit labyrinth. One of the most beautiful labyrinths is at Chartres Cathedral outside Paris. It has 11 circuits. The pavements were laid down around the year 1200. It's amazing that it's still as intact as it is. In the Middle Ages, Christianity began adopting the labyrinth and including it in cathedrals. It was a big thing at the time to go on pilgrimages. The highest ideal would be to go on a pilgrimage to the Holy Land, to Jerusalem. You got a lot of spiritual credit if you could do that. But at the time of the Crusades, that was a really dangerous journey to make. So instead, the church designated 7 European cathedrals, mainly in France, to become a substitute for a pilgrimage to Jerusalem. They became little Jerusalems. And the highlight of the pilgrimage was to walk the labyrinth in those cathedrals. The path of the labyrinth became a metaphor for the twists and turns of life and the temptations a person would meet along the way. If you look closely, you'll see that there's a scar in the center of the labyrinth at Chartres. The original centerpiece was made of copper, brass, and lead. It was pulled up during the Napoleonic Wars and used as cannon fodder. Some scholars think that the centerpiece may have had an engraving of, guess what? The Minotaur. Now, what is a mythical beast from pagan Greece doing in the middle of a Christian cathedral? Well, the Minotaur became a representation of the devil, an evil force that Christians had to encounter on the narrow spiritual path. And once you overcome that devil, then you can attain enlightenment. Remember how the labyrinth was originally a symbol of the life-giving birth canal of the Earth Mother? It suddenly becomes a torturous journey instead, a way of doing penance for your sins. Some people on their pilgrimages were required not just to walk the labyrinth, but to walk it on their knees in penance. Now, the total length of the path of the Chartres labyrinth is 858 feet. Can you imagine walking on your knees on hard marble, nearly the length of 3 football fields? But somehow, the more joyful spirit of the labyrinth came through, and people began using them in a different way. They danced through them. They played games on them, like young men racing each other through the labyrinth to get to a young woman at the center. The church, of course, did not like this. But what really disturbed the church authorities was the concept of a person making a journey to the divine without the help of a priest. Think about it. If you could achieve spiritual enlightenment by traveling through the labyrinth, you didn't need a mediator between you and God. You didn't need that whole church bureaucracy. You had personal access to the divine, and they became irrelevant. So the church authorities started tearing up the labyrinths, literally removing the pavements in those cathedrals. It's one of the reasons that the labyrinth at Chartres is so amazing, because it survived. The labyrinth at the cathedral at Amiens, north of Paris, can be seen in the present day, but it is a reconstruction. So what can these labyrinths mean for us today? I asked some of our labyrinth walkers at UU Westside what they feel when they walk the labyrinth.
For me, walking the labyrinth is like a walking meditation, and it really gives me the opportunity to go within and to be at peace with myself and the world around me and all the magic and the mysticism that's here.
When I walk the labyrinth, I actually feel a little dizzy when I get towards the middle, but maybe it's a spiritual thing that's happening to me. But it is peaceful. It's a really nice way to calmly get some exercise and to meditate and live, right in the moment.
Dr. Lauren Artris is the woman responsible for bringing the labyrinth to Grace Cathedral in San Francisco. In her book, she says, "Why does the labyrinth attract people? Because it is a tool to guide healing, deepen self-knowledge, and empower creativity." She says, walking the labyrinth clears the mind and gives insight into the spiritual journey. It urges action. It calms people in the throes of life transitions. It helps them see their lives in the context of a path, a pilgrimage. They realize that they're not human beings on a spiritual path, but spiritual beings on a human path. Lauren says that too often the church has been involved in, quote, worship from the neck up. Instead, the labyrinth engages your entire body, all of your senses. She says the labyrinth, in its strange and uncanny way, offers a sacred and stable space to focus the attention and listen to the longing of the soul. By following an invisible thread, we connect to the source, to the sacred. When our senses are shut down, she says, when we live on automatic pilot, we miss the opportunity to grow. So this is a way to awaken our senses. Lauren is not only an Episcopal priest, she's a psychotherapist. She says psychological healing is one of the most pressing issues of our time. Many of us carry psychological and spiritual burdens from our past that hinder us in the present. When we are carrying the burdens of the past, our relationships suffer and our creativity is limited. The labyrinth, she says, can provide a safe container for shedding those burdens. Here in the labyrinth, you may be able to find a deep connection to the holy. What will you feel when you walk the labyrinth? You won't know until you try. Will you feel a sense of peace? Or will you find the beast in the center, something that you need to grapple with? What if you're physically unable to walk the labyrinth? There is such a thing as a sand labyrinth, like we have here on the altar, where you can trace the labyrinth with your finger. And our email to the congregation this week included a labyrinth you can print out and follow with your finger. Finger labyrinths are not a new thing. They're very old ones found at the entrances of sacred sites, where people would trace the path with their fingertips before entering. Harold Stone said, "The great need of our time is for people to be connected to spirit, for people to be connected to a core of feeling in themselves, that makes their lives vital and full of meaning, that makes life a mystery evermore to be uncovered. Lauren says, our souls hunger for the lost connection to our intuitive nature, expressed through myths, dreams, stories, and images. We long for a creative, symbolic process that nurtures our spiritual nature, that feeds the soul. She's definitely not anti-science like some of the people we're seeing right now during the pandemic. But she has an interesting observation. She says, empirical science has been the major proponent of, if you can't see it and can't measure it, it doesn't exist. This reasoning is beginning to be recognized as part of an evolutionary step that we needed to take. But it offers only a limited view, which we have mistaken for the whole picture. The tyranny of the age of reason, she says, is losing its grip. The human intellect, especially when pushed to its maximum, is limited when not used in harmony with other human faculties. She says we must look for new models, new definitions, new ways of doing things, even for new human faculties that lie dormant within us. The labyrinth, that ancient symbol, is a tool that may take us to that new human dimension. May it be so. It is time to extinguish our chalice. If you have a chalice or candle at home, draw it closer to you, and we will extinguish them together with these words. We extinguish our chalice, but we hold the light in our hearts as we follow our path into the unknown. Go forth now. May your path take you into the center, and may you find your way to the holy. Blessed be.